Hi, Nirmita, Satish. Yes, Dr. Shiv, would you like, and I think Rajat is also there. Would you like to try your audio and video once, just in case to check?
Hi, this is Satish. I don't know how my audio is, but I don't have video because of technical problems.
Okay, fair enough. We can hear you. Dr.
Right.
Kathuria, good afternoon. Nice to
Hi.
have you.
Hi,
Yes,
this
good
is
to see you.
Nirmita. Can you? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes.
can hear you and see you. Nirmita, I can hear you. Do you
Okay.
want to switch on your audio or is there an issue?
Uh, can you see me on the video?
Actually, no. Let me ask the team.
So I'd actually prefer to just go with audio because
Okay, fair enough.
it's easier for me to navigate. This platform is really not convenient for screen reader users, and I'm accessing it through my mobile phone.
I understand. No worries.
Okay.
Thank you. No worries. So, Nima, we are waiting for Sunil, right?
Yeah, I'm just checking with.
Yeah,
Just checking.
yeah. I guess, Rajat, if you want, since it's 12 o'clock, you can start and Nima will get Sunil into the room. And admin, you can downgrade me.
So just one sec, Amrita.
Yeah.
For now, is it possible for you to turn off the, as in mute me and turn off the video because the buttons are not working with my screen reader?
Okay, you
Is it
are,
possible to?
your screen is not there. Admin, can you mute Nirmita and when required?
And remove the video and just remove the video also.
Video is not there, Nimita.
Yeah, this is not speaking the buttons. Okay, fine. Just unmute. Yeah, the buttons are not speaking. So just unmute me when you want me to talk.
Yeah, sure. It's been
Okay.
communicated to the admin team. Amrita, could you please stay for a minute? I'm just connecting with the Rishabh, Mr. Ibrahim.
One moment, I was speaking to Sunil. He was having an
Okay.
issue in logging in. Yes, Nima, you were saying something?
No, I was wanting to for you to stay on for a minute. I was trying to connect with Mr. Ibrahim. That's okay.
No,
Thank you
Sunil
so
is
much.
into the room. Sunil
Yeah,
is there.
now he's there. Yeah.
There
Thank
he
you.
is. Mr. Abraham is there.
Rajat,
Sorry,
over to you, and
Okay.
I
Sorry,
can
I'm
be
late.
downgraded now.
Hi, Sunil.
Hi, Rajat. Wonderful to see you again.
Wonderful. Good to see you. Wonderful. So, Amrita, can we start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Amrita, and thank you to IIGF for inviting me to moderate this very important discussion on connecting the unconnected digital Bharat. I think this is a theme that is not new, and I suspect that it will still be new a few years later, depending on how we sort of define the unconnected. But just before I start the panel discussion, let me say a little bit about my perspectives on the topic, and then I will go to the panelists in the order that was given to me. And so some indicative questions I will refer to, but please sort of provide your perspectives on the theme. I think one looks at internet sort of over the last couple of decades, one gets the feeling that there's been an explosion all over the world. So if for a moment you do a thought experiment and think about John Lennon, imagine there is no country. If you do that thought experiment, then you will obviously see that there's been an explosion in the number of connections. There are almost 6 billion connections, internet connections in the world today. My God, that's gigantic. But if you look at the other side, there are, 2 billion people who are still not connected. But simply, if you were to look at the world as without barriers, then this would be a fantastic achievement. But the moment you begin to then divide the world into different countries, then you would see those divides becoming sort of very apparent and palpable. The rich countries, the developed countries, the mature markets have got almost 95% internet connectivity, and their quality of connectivity is also pretty good. But if you divide the world into emerging and yet to emerge economies, then you will see that those divides run through, they are pervasive. And in India, we are no strangers to the digital divide. There have been several policy attempts to try and bridge this digital divide. Some of them have been successful, some have not. But digital Bharat or digital broadband still remains a dream for us in India. And that's one of the themes that I'm going to pick on and try and get the perspectives of the panelists. But we've done fairly well in terms of, again, if you look at the macro perspective, we've done fairly well. We've got the largest number of internet users in the world. We are the largest users of data in the world. But then if you begin to do the calculations or do the analysis, then you'll see there's a gender divide, there's a rural divide, there's a geographical divide, there's state level divides, there's a generational divide. So there are all kinds of divides, and I guess in some sense they're worse than the global average, which means for us there's a long way to go to try and bridge these divides. There obviously policy will have to play a role, but I think enforcement will play an even bigger role. And I think the private sector has a huge role to play in bridging these digital divides. And sometimes we think that government will be able to do it, but I don't think government service provision is anymore an option. It will have to be done by the private sector while government provides an enabling role. The concept of universal service, as we defined it when I came to work in the telecom sector, universal service used to be just voice. Today, it's far from just voice, and it's not even mobile. We used to say, okay, not fixed line. Let's think of mobiles as being the instrument of universal service, but then it became internet, and then good quality internet and broadband, and internet access as a fundamental right, etc. So these are, sort of upgrading what the de minimis or minimum level of connectivity that should be affordable and should be available to citizens of a country. And why is this become so important? Well, it's become important because it's the new form of infrastructure. It's the new infrastructure. You remember roads and electricity. I think infrastructure connectivity or digital infrastructure connectivity is now the new sort of road or new electricity, as economists call it, in terms of the general purpose nature of the technology that is available. Of course, data is the new oil, or data is the new toxic, etc. This is something which is very specific to the internet and not so much to roads or electricity. Although roads, you could also look at negatives of roads, which is pollution or emissions, etc. Too much vehicular traffic. But in internet, the data and the lack of privacy or the right to privacy, etc., that has become a very animated topic of discussion amongst the internet and amongst the telecommunications or the digital community. So, I mean, these are complex issues, and I will sort of not weigh in on them. I will let the panel sort of talk about them. We have an excellent panel here. We have Dr. Nirmita Narasimhan, who's I'm going to request first to speak, and then I'll go to Sunil. I won't introduce the speakers too much, just their sort of current affiliations, because they're all very well-known people. Dr. Nirmita is the chairperson of the Broadband India Forum Committee on ICT for Inclusive Ability for Persons with Disabilities. So that's an interesting divide, again, that she could reflect on. But the question I'm putting to Dr. Nirmita, and as I said, you can take your perspectives on how the unconnected can be connected, and disabilities, of course, becomes an important perspective. But could you also weigh in on sort of the bottom of the pyramid? I've noticed you've done some work for Learn Asia. So Nirmita, if you could weigh in on access at the bottom of the pyramid, whether that access is, what do they use it for? Is that access adequate? But your perspectives on the divide. Over to you, Nirmita.
Good afternoon, and Mr. Katuri, I think your questions are pretty much what I had wanted to cover. So I'd like to reflect on what it means for me to be connected in today's world. Right? It's not, for me, I think it goes beyond now. We should go beyond the construct of access, availability, affordability, and just having these technologies or having an internet connection, and think about what we are able to do with them. Because at the end of the day, there has to be some meaning and impact of the technologies. Talking about persons with disabilities, of course, yes, it has made a huge impact. It has transformed society in the way it's the difference between me being here and me not being here, right? Ever since I've had technology, that's when I've had a good education and employment, and I'm connected, and I'm making an impact. And I think that's, for me, the difference, and yes, we have to definitely focus on the 3 A's, but I think somewhere we also, as a country, sometimes if we focus too much on the quantity, we are not focusing enough on the quality. And our push has to be both quantitative as well as qualitative. So when I say quality, it means quality in everything. If you're talking about quality of the call, if we want to access even accessibility services of captioning, or have online education, if you're having call quality issues, quality in terms of data that we collect, are we just checking whether people have internet connections, or are we also looking at what we are doing with them? And here I'd like to reflect on a research which I did with Learn Asia, looking at the mobile usage of persons with disabilities. And what we discovered, that hardly half of the people were using mobile phones. And in that, very few people had smartphones. Less than 10% had smartphones. And in that, most of them were not even turning on their accessibility features because they didn't know about it. Some were using smartphones and just making calls. And most of them didn't know how to use it, or didn't think they could use it. Nobody got them a phone. They didn't know about these features. So I think we really need to focus on skills. What skills are required to use these technologies. If we are looking at persons with disabilities, we are looking at older persons, and this is almost 25% of the world population if we count both. And there are accessibility features on existing operating systems which are already there, like voiceover, magnifier, recognition, text to speech, all these, which we need skill building. We need to train people on how to use these things. We need to raise awareness that these things exist, and you can use them. And also overall awareness, because you still come across people who say, oh acha ji, blind log phone use kar sakte hain, we didn't know that. So there is a whole range of awareness raising and capacity building that we need to do. Another issue, I think, other than capability building, which I would like to mention, is compliance, because we have the devices, we have the technology, we've learned how to use these technologies. So then what? Are we able to access the content? And again, there we face a problem. We have an entire population of people, there's a majority population of people who are not able to use technologies. They don't have it or anything. But there is also the minuscule population who has everything, but they're not able to access the content because they do not conform to accessibility standards. And increasingly, I appreciate government of India's efforts and industry's efforts in this area. There are, a lot of standards recognition. We've just notified standards on accessible ICT, procurement. We have standards on web accessibility for over a decade. But again, nobody is implementing it. And when you talked about enforcement, why? Because either they don't know about it, or they don't know how to do it, and nobody's checking if they're doing it. So despite all these things, we still have content apps which are inaccessible. And the mode which we are in is like firefighting mode. Every time something comes and then we realize it's inaccessible, so we run and we say, no, this is not working, and then somebody puts in a quick fix. And we really need to move away from that model and think inclusive right from the start. Otherwise, at some point of time, we would always be leaving people behind, because we can't fix everything midway into the process. So with that, I'll conclude for now, and I'll be happy to answer more questions later.
Thank you, Nirmata. I think you've raised some crucial issues and fundamental issues about skills and connecting the people at the bottom and with disabilities. So keeping that perspective in mind, I want to go to Sunil, who is the Public Policy Director, India for Data Governance and Emerging Technologies at Meta India, which also better known as Facebook. So, Sunil, given what Nirmata said about lack of access, lack of quality, and all these other features that she brought out, that there's desperately skilling needed. So from your perspective, we are talking about data governance, and she did bring up the issue of standards. Now, should we worry about data protection, data laws, data governance when we have such huge divides? Is it something that can be done simultaneously? Or my question really is, will data laws or data governance come in the way of access and good quality of access? Or will it be an enabler for good quality access, or it doesn't matter? Either way. Yes, Sunil, over to you.
Thanks, Rajat. Before I come to your question, I wanted to quickly reflect on what Dr. Narasimhan had just said, and sort of share a couple of things that Meta is doing and perhaps should be doing to contribute to greater accessibility. The first point she made, or one of the points she made about the lack of uniformity when it came to the accessibility of apps and content. Our small contribution in that direction has been to produce open source toolkits like React Native. React Native is a authoring tool for mobile app interfaces. And the advantage of using React Native is every app you develop using React Native will be accessible out of the box. So that's one way to solve this lack of compliance with standards, which is sort of to build accessibility into the infrastructure. Yesterday, I had spoken on another panel about a lot of the open source work that Meta was doing, particularly when it came to languages and translations and so on. And today, I sort of came to the conclusion after listening to Dr. Narasimhan that the other technologies, such as computer vision technologies that we are building as part of the foundations of the metaverse, perhaps it would be useful to open source some of that as well, because there would be accessibility applications when it came to computer vision technologies. So I'll end my sort of quick reaction to Dr. Narasimhan's opening comment, and now return to the question you're asking. And I think a similar question could be asked even about different generations of technology. So very often I hear in policy circles the argument being made that why should you worry about building the metaverse when everybody or many users are still on feature phones and so on, right? So, and then what you're asking is, why should we worry about protecting the rights of users if we still don't have access and sufficient access to the network? And I'm still convinced, like I always was, that these are false dichotomies, and we don't necessarily need to choose between them. Ideally, we should have it both. But these are not simple solutions to solve. So let's take a technology like facial recognition, for instance. Now, facial recognition technologies from a privacy perspective is almost universally considered a surveillance technology, and therefore there is a lot of pressure for stringent regulation, also bans. Many of you may have noticed that Facebook itself turned off facial recognition on its platform and scrubbed the database of facial recognition templates. But if one were to ask or interrogate facial recognition as a technology, from the perspective of the visually impaired, then you suddenly realize that there is application for facial recognition technology from an accessibility perspective. So some of these data protection questions and data governance questions don't have simple and straightforward answers. Sometimes the necessary policy option is a balancing act or a trade-off where both competing imperatives are not optimally served. But sometimes, thanks to technology, for example, privacy enhancing technologies or privacy by design, you could sort of solve them in an optimization problem format. And sometimes you're able to maximize much more the competing imperatives. So there's a lot of work to be done to answer the question you're asking. But the short answer is, ideally, we shouldn't have to choose between those options. Ideally, we should take all of these competing equities and imperatives together and as a community solve for them collectively and simultaneously. Back to you.
Thanks, Sunil. Yes, yes, indeed. I completely agree with you. It is a false dichotomy. But my question was a question. I mean, where do you stand on these? I myself don't have a proclivity that access should be at the cost of a lack of privacy. But the fact that, and I'll come back to you on this, a lot of the people who are unconnected don't really care about data privacy, or at least that seems to be the sort of feedback that one gets. They're more concerned about connectivity, but I understand what you're saying. Let me go to Dr. Shivakumar now, who's worked at ICANN. I think, sorry, to Mr. Satish Babu. I'm sorry. Let me go to Mr. Satish Babu, and then I'll go to Dr. Shivakumar. Satish Babu has been an internet governance practitioner for about a decade and has been the chair of ICANN's Asia Pacific End User Organization, which is called APRALO, for about 7 years. And he's the co-founder of the Indian School on Internet Governance. So my question to Satish Babu is that many years ago, I remember when I was beginning to work in the telecom sector, I remember we had to make a choice between what is called the multi-stakeholder model and the other model of internet governance. And we chose the multi-stakeholder model, which is, of course, everybody should have an equal voice, and government should not really get the privilege, but it does have a privilege on so many other platforms. But in ICANN, in internet, we specifically chose the multi-stakeholder model. So while telling our audience about what the multi-stakeholder model is, not too much, but I would request you to sort of reflect on whether that model has been sort of beneficial to us in some way in trying to connect the unconnected. Has it been able to create awareness about what it means to be in a multi-stakeholder model? And at a meta level, not to you, the pun is unintended, Sunil, at a meta level, have we been able to sort of pull our weight in ICANN globally? Over to you, Satish.
Thanks very much, Rajat. Apologies for not having my video on. I am an open source user, and WebEx does not seem to like my Ubuntu machine. And that there itself is a connectivity gap of sorts. I just would like to mention what INSIG is. The India School on Internet Governance is a community-driven capacity building initiative founded in 2016. We just finished our 7th edition in September in IIIT Hyderabad. And we have built up over 350 fellows, many of whom are active today in the national and global internet governance processes. Now, I will connect the thread of multi-stakeholderism to this. But before that, I note that the digital divide is changing. And in 2020, when we were pushed online with hardly any preparation, I remember this picture of a little girl sitting on the roof of her home to connect to a class. Now, that problem is now more or less kind of gone in India, and that's one of our major achievements. Although yesterday we had a young person from Ladakh she was also an INSIC fellow, who was very passionately pointing out that Ladakh is actually quite cut off even today. And the statement that the whole of India is connected is perhaps not true. Now, I would like to examine this question of connectivity. What is really connectivity? Is it a mobile to internet to another mobile? Or is it broader than that? For me, connectivity refers to a human being to a mobile to the network to maybe another mobile or a web or whatever other application. And that human to mobile link is actually quite important, and we tend to largely ignore it. The reason is that there are several nuances in that interface. Disability has already been raised. That is a part of the human to mobile interface. Languages and scripts is another aspect. And in India's case, given our linguistic and cultural diversity, a multilingual internet is certainly an aspirational goal for us. There are also other risks in this interface, including already mentioned data protection, security, identity, and so on. Now, coming from the multi-stakeholder model, there is another point that, for instance, now the problems with internet governance is all multi-stakeholder in nature, because one actor cannot solve these problems. It requires concerted effort from multiple actors, government, business, civil society, technical community, to create solutions. And later on, I will talk about one problem called universal acceptance, which has to do with languages, scripts, and the DNS. But currently, it's back to you, Rajat. I'll speak later about this particular technical problem, which has been resolved through or being resolved through the multi-stakeholder model. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Babu. Let me now go to Dr. Shiva Kumar, who's Principal Advisor, Broadband India Forum. And he's got some amazing sort of experience. He's worked with government, he's worked with the private sector, he's worked with Qualcomm, he's worked with Nokia, Ericsson. So fantastic sort of experience, a 360-degree experience. So he's been in hardware, been in software, been in policy. So the question to you, among the other questions you want to address, Dr. Shiva Kumar, my question to you is, so India, we talk about, $1 trillion digital economy. I know it will be achieved. There's no question about it. We will become, at some point, we will become a $5 trillion economy, and at some point, we will become a 1 trillion digital economy. So the question is, when we're, what is it that we can do to accelerate this process? It's a very delayed sort of milestone already. What do you think, given your experience, and linking it to the theme of connecting the unconnected? Because if the sector grows, if connectivity grows, obviously there will be some trickle down, and therefore access will increase. So your perspectives on the theme, as well as when will we become a $1 trillion digital economy? Digital economy. Yes.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you, Rajat Kathuria-ji. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great opportunity given by the IIGF to me to speak. First of all, I would like to touch that Broadband India Forum, that Nirmata has said that ICT for the inclusivity for the disability. Broadband India Forum is the core of the strategy that we help the disability, and we always keep it on the top of our agenda. And also the data protection bill, because I'm also working on this, and this is basically everybody one day have to have a concern whether it's a connected or not connected over the time. Over the time, everybody has to be connected. Otherwise, that community, which is the remote community and unconnected, they will be leaving behind. So, in order to bring them on the mainstream, lot of government initiatives has come up, whether it's a through the Digital India and through the broadband is becoming like a fundamental need for each and everyone. It's like a fundamental right. Otherwise, we are basically, the digital divide is going to be increased if we are not getting them connected. It's just not having the access to the information. It gives them the lot of privilege. It gives them the opportunity for the business, to the people which are basically connected in the remote area. It gives them the getting all the information, Also, they can play a role in the village level entrepreneurship. They can have the different type of innovative ideas, and the talent is basically we can explore the talent which is. Now the challenge is how basically we achieve this target. That's the one of the major challenge in spite of the efforts made by the government through the I rightly said that government can play a role of the enabler. Government can play the role of the regulator or the policy, or it can basically enforcement. But the engagement of the industry is must. Without the engagement of the private sector, it's not possible to achieve the target. But question is how to motivate the industry, why they will invest or how they will invest, because investing in now one it's a business model. They get a lot of basically the ARPU and all these things is too high in the urban, and what they get in the rural is very uh, little in comparison to the investment or the capex they do it. And more than the capex, the angle comes is like opex is very difficult. Whenever if we talk about say connectivity can be either through the fiber or it can be through the say Wi-Fi we have. And we are saying now the integrated model we are talking about, the Wi-Fi and the optical fiber and the satellite. That we are talking about the 5G coming up. But in order to make the 5G happen, it's not a easy task in the rural, because the viability for the business viability for the TSPs, for the infrastructure providers, it will not building up the infrastructure, having the optical fiber into the different remote areas, or having the even Wi-Fi and then maintaining that. More than that, what is basically the challenge is even if you put government put the capex, suppose the government comes up and they say okay, we are going to do the through the USO fund or through the different mechanism of the CSR fund, and we make it mandatory that we need to build up a internet infrastructure. So the challenge is how to maintain this, how to basically propagate it, how to make use of this. As that it's not only the skill for the user, I will add here, is a maintaining the whole system, whole infrastructure. Whatever we have once installed, it has to be kept running and maintaining, and uptime has to be there. And also maybe if we are talking about the different type of model, that India is a very diverse country, a diverse culture, and it's having the geographies also. We are having demographically also very different type. Somewhere it's basically we are having the desert, somewhere we are having such a high hills, remote areas, somewhere we are having so much of the disaster coming up. So the disaster also gives a lot of problem in the connectivity. Everything goes out, the power goes out, and connectivity goes out. So in that case, the hybrid model, which is basically balance of the optical fiber, the Wi-Fi, and the satellite connect. The satellite connect is very important for say providing the backhaul, or in maybe in the some of the remote areas. Uh, it can be through the fixed basically terminals. We can have the fixed terminals, so that in the case of the disaster, it can play a vital role in the in this thing. So it's a very basically comprehensive detailed model has to be worked out, and in order to be it's not just the model. Business model has been there, a lot of models are coming, but how to execute it, how to involve the community, how to involve the private partners, how the government facilitate. So how the BharatNet can play the role. So I'll before that I will give the specific answer, but yeah, back to you, sir.
Sure, Dr. Shivakumar. Thank you. I guess you mentioned sort of what is on everybody's mind, that India is a very heterogeneous country, and therefore there are difficulties. And I remember Nirmata made a comment which sounded like we are sort of flying an airplane while building it, right? So we almost always do that troubleshooting. We try and build an airplane while it's in the air. That can sometimes be a risky proposition. But for the next round, I'm going to turn the discussion and the debate completely on its head. And what I mean by that, I will sort of mention, which is that we it's par for course in India, and I've been sort of party to this and guilty of this, is that we talk about the negatives very often, and it's easy to talk about the negatives because negatives in the sense not in a I'm not downgrading ourselves or us, but it's such a large country as you mentioned, Shiva, and there is so much heterogeneity. So there's going to be positives and there are going to be negatives. But I want to turn the discussion around, especially in this round. We are going to host the G20 next year, and Digital India is going to be a very strong pillar that the government is going to advocate and try and showcase our strength. So I want to begin with Nirmita again in the same order and ask, is there any positive that you would like to reflect on in the work that you've done that has served to connect the unconnected? For example, at the bottom of the pyramid, if there's been any anecdote, even any story which has given you a warm feeling in your heart that yes, this is something we would like to scale up. Anything that you would like to share with the audience, any positive impact? Nirmata, over to you. Dr. Narasimhan, are you there? Can you hear me? I think, okay. Until she I'd request the organizers to try and connect with her. I think we've lost her connectivity. So same question to you, Sunil, in your experience, has there been anything positive that you'd like to share in terms of connectivity or what you've seen, you've done, either in your current sort of work or even in your previous engagements that you had? Sunil?
I just saw a message from Amrita saying that Nirmita is back.
Nirmita?
Someone is back with us.
Nirmita, are you there? Can you hear me? She's
got to be
muted.
unmuted first. The
Please
organizers
unmute
have to
yourself,
unmute.
Nirmita. Dr. Narasimhan, could you unmute yourself? I think she's still muted.
Maybe we
Okay.
can come back.
While Amrita, so Sunil, would you want to take a stab at that? Is there anything that you wish to highlight?
Yeah, I would like to sort of take us into the future. As many of you will already know, Meta as a company, thanks to the vision of our founder, is now building the next version of the internet, the metaverse, which will be a 3D version of the internet, is currently being developed by Meta and by many other companies. And if I go back to my very first year in engineering school in Bangalore, this is 1991. And as a student of industrial and production engineering, we had to take some mechanical engineering courses in the very first year, and one of them was welding. And I remember that I had welding for my first year exam, and I didn't do particularly well. And part of my sort of explanation is that I had done welding only once previously. So welding is a resource intensive activity in the sense that you destroy the materials that are given to you. So for a college like the one that I studied at, there wasn't this unlimited resource. You couldn't go and weld to your heart's content and perfect your skill. You could weld only once, and then after that you had your exam. So there is a company called Skillberry that uses the Oculus headset, and the way they raise the capacity of folks that do painting and welding is to do the training using virtual reality. And they have many users who use the technology and many users who say and many companies that endorse the effectiveness of this training. Quickly, to sort of revisit the access question, what Skillberry is doing is they have built a local content server using a Raspberry Pi, and then the rich content, the 3D content is being streamed to the headsets using the local server that has been built on Raspberry Pi. Now, this really points to the need for enabling policy. Ideally, in order to make the metaverse successful in the future, we need 5G connecting the internet to the access point, and then from the access point, we need to connect to the headset, ideally using Wi-Fi. Now, the existing Wi-Fi frequencies that are available are crowded and the bands are small and so on, and that doesn't really make it work for applications like XR. And therefore, one policy reform that could be considered is to de-license 6 gigahertz so that Wi-Fi applications like this could be built, and you wouldn't need the hack that Skillberry is using, which is to have a local server to stream the content. So that's my response.
So
I think Deepika is with
quickly?
us now.
Thank you, Sunil. I just wanted a very quick follow-up. You've talked about 5G, and I think in your first answer as well, you did mention about 5G having an important, or at least you hinted that 5G has an important role to play. Every new generation has an important role to play, even in countries with pervasive digital divides, and that's fair. But given the result of this auction, just happened on 5G, that almost everybody stayed away from the auction except acquiring 5G, except Geo. Do you think it's a good sort of building block or a good starting point for enabling the ecosystem that you're talking about? Or do we need to rethink our assignment of spectrum, especially 5G?
You're asking me a question that perhaps only economists and experts in spectrum can answer. So I wouldn't know the answer. I'll take it. I'll sort of extrapolate your question into an area that I'm more comfortable with, which is standards development. And I think Nirmita, Dr. Narasimhan has also pointed out the importance of standards development. In the 5G standard, Indian contributors had advocated for low mobility, large cell to be also included as a use case for the standard. And they were basically solving for rural India. And this goes back to the heart of your question. Is 5G an appropriate technology for India? When the 3GPP consortium refused to accept these contributions, then the Indian technologists and scientists forked the standard and produced 5GI. And later, I think 3GPP capitulated, and then this use case was built back into the main standard, and then there was no more need for 5GI. So I think if the question is emerging technologies appropriate for India, then the answer is they might be, and in order for them to be, ideally we need Indians participating in these global standard bodies, ensuring that these emerging technologies are useful to India. And usually when they solve for disadvantaged populations in India, they're also solving for disadvantaged populations in other parts of the world. So I think that's why global standards are critical, and sort of indigenous and balkanized standards are really the last policy option when everything else fails. I'm sorry I didn't answer The
No, you did.
precise
Actually, you
question
did.
that you asked,
did.
but I took it in a
You did
different way.
answer the question, and in my summary, I will mention how you have actually answered the question. So thank you, Sunil. Nirmita, did you hear my question, or may I repeat it for you? I wanted to sort of you to highlight anything that you've experienced in your own engagement in the digital sector, where you are heartened to see a certain solution, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, and that one that you would like to see scaled up. Any positive, we often in India only talk about the negatives. I wanted to reflect on the positives in this round of questions. Nirmita?
Sure. So I actually have come across a lot of positives. Even with the government, I feel that they've always been everybody's been very proactive, in working with us on policy reform, etc. If we are talking about actual change, we did a research last year to see how technologies are impacting people and to what extent they use technologies. So what we found out amongst us, the number of people we surveyed was that 95+% were using technologies, not even single. They were using a mobile and a laptop when they were doing their work. And I think there were a lot of learnings from that, because if you look at one is the fact that obviously there are enough accessibility features there, and given the skill and devices people are using, and the ICTs and connecting to the information society, what is important is that we should see ICT as a tool, not the end result. And people were having better opportunities in education and employment. So what I would really like to see scaled up is that, of course, coming back to the access and availability issue, that has to be there along with the training. The second thing is I'd like to give the example of it's a long back, see, a decade ago when we were advocating for web accessibility. That time there was a Mr. Rajesh Agarwal. He was with Nixie, and then he went back to Maharashtra, Secretary IT. I remember one of the things he did was organize web accessibility training for all the Maha Online users, and he got people who were experts in web accessibility to give them training, and then ask them to go back and fix their websites, and then have another round of training to identify their issues and see if it was sorted out. And I think some of these kind of proactive changing things on ground rather than just talking about it, some of these ideas have been really good along the way. I've come across many of them, and it would be nice to see many of these coming up again.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, Nirmita. It is indeed, story of India. When we focus so much on what's not right, there are a lot of things that are right and that often do not get highlighted. And the problem, or not the problem, the way change happens is through sort of one person or a few people who are dedicated or committed to that change happening. I would like to, as an economist, I would like to see a more institutional-led process rather than an individual-led process, but not to undermine what individuals do in the Indian system. And there are several examples. And thank you, Nirmata, for highlighting those. I wanted to go back to Satish and the question that he had asked, and he said he'd answer it in the next round. One of the things, Satish, that became apparent during COVID was, especially in education, was the lack of connectivity and the lack of quality of connectivity. And therefore, it's become pretty much folklore now to talk about 2 years of education lost during the lockdowns, etc. But you did raise another point about universalizing of the scripts and language and scripts and getting universal acceptance. And you said you'll talk about it in this round. So is there anything positive that you have to say about that? And if you on the accessibility front, Satish?
Thanks, Rajat. Satish here. Starting at the bottom of the pyramid, connectivity wouldn't mean computing or using internet in local languages. And this has got multiple aspects. It's about content, it's about tools, and it's about network infrastructure. Not the communications infrastructure, but network infrastructure. Now, tools are things like text-to-speech, natural language interfaces, dictionaries, thesaurus, AI, ML tools, etc. But the network infrastructure is where we've been working on it with some degree of success. The main network infrastructure is DNS, which is normally invisible. I mean, none of us think about DNS, but that's because it works so perfectly. And none of us have heard of ICANN because they are doing their job without any issue. Had there been an issue, people would have woken up and said, who's this? Who's running this? So usually networks, even during the surge in internet access in COVID times, there was no problem with the internet itself. It really stood its ground. But when you talk about DNS and local scripts, non-Latin scripts, then there are some issues that would come up. The first was about internationalized domain names, IDNs. For instance, .bharat in Devanagari. Now we've been working, the ICANN community has been working on this for more than a decade now, and it is now kind of stable. India has several languages that have this .bharat right now. But the problem is that if you take .bharat, like for example, I have a Devanagari domain name namaskar.bharat. If I create an email ID, satish@namaskar.bharat, that email ID will not work as a regular English or Latin email ID. For instance, I cannot register on IRCTC with that email ID or on Wikipedia. Now, since email is not just an address, it's also an identity today because we use it as an identity for so many places. Any website where we want to register, our email is the identity. Therefore, this is a kind of significant problem, and unless we can solve this, in other words, this is called universal acceptance. That means non-Latin email ID works exactly like others. So that is what is happening now, and there's a multi-stakeholder process. It needs support from big tech companies, Google, Apple, to open source communities, and Sunil mentioned Meta, as well as enabling policy. And the policy is being developed through a joint multi-stakeholder process within ICANN. Back to you, Rajat.
So, Satish, can I just ask you a follow-up question? When I was in ICRIER, we actually worked on this problem along with METI on universal acceptance and DNS, domain names, etc., and sort of trying to have competition there and trying to popularize Indian domain names as well, .bharat. Now, is there a technical solution that exists to make that interoperability possible? Because interoperability has happened in other domains. You think of ATM cards, you think of UPI. There are essentially interoperable systems. So, is there a technical solution that is possible?
Right. The short answer is no. The reason is, suppose you take an email, it has two parties, the sender and the receiver. So there are two systems involved, the sending system and the receiving system. Some people like Google have made their systems capable. But if you send out a mail to an arbitrary person, that person's system may not be enabled. So it requires everybody to kind of, get going with the conversion of their software. And that is a massive exercise. Some people are not incentivized. Suppose I'm a server sitting in Sweden where I don't care about what happens in India, and I don't want to invest the money to change my code. So that is the challenge. Right. So we have to convince people to kind of change. Thanks.
Right. Yes, it's a sort of problem that I could draw a parallel, a metaphor with malaria. There was a lot of malaria in India, continues to be, and very little investment that was made by big pharma companies in the disease because there was no incentive to do so, because it wasn't a disease that confronted many of the pharma companies were working in other countries. So yes, sort of characterizing this problem as the lack of incentives is, I think, a good way to be able to find a solution for it as well. So thank you, Satish. The last my last question, and then I'll go to the audience if there is time, is to Dr. Shiv Kumar. So in line with what I've been asking the others, is there anything positive, given that India will take on the G20 next year? We're already the presidency, but next year we'll have these seminars. So what do you think we can showcase as our achievement? What do you think is a positive achievement for us in India in the sphere of activity that you currently deal in?
G20 talks about the digital infrastructure and also the digital connectivity largely, along with the digital identity. So these are one of the key features. And number of technologies, of course, has been mentioned as a digital technologies, which are rapidly flowing, and the market being driven by the market, or market is driving them. So a lot of trends are setting in the new technologies. As far as the concern of the showcasing to the G20, number one, India has come up with the various reforms into the different areas in order to have a digital connectivity. Like it is the reforms coming up by the space reforms, when the satellite reforms has come up, and the number of initiatives are being taken for the basically the spreading the connectivity, the digital connectivity. Also we are coming up like a rating of the, first time is the initiative is coming out that rating of the buildings for the digital connectivity, the thing. And the steps in the, that data protection bill is one of the right step in this direction. And most probably it will also happen before the our G20 meet happens. And a lot of the, digital summit and number of activities are going on the on this thing. And lot of credence, a lot of, through the Digital India, Make in India, and the Startup India initiatives, we have unicorns. We have the number of basically technology. So is the number of, that launching of the rockets by the startups, uh, and and doing the, say, monitoring or surveillance using the drone in the remote areas in the there are number of basically initiatives, and India is not the same India which used to be a decade ago. The type of developments are happening, the initiatives are being taken. And recently I have seen the collaboration between the government and the industry. Lot of meets are happening, whether it's a productivity link incentive scheme has come up, whether it's a basically USO funds involving the uh, and motivating the youngsters for the indigenous products, or the like 5G. Of course, it's a good initiative with the certain challenges. Every technology or every induction have the challenge. And but once it comes up, certainly it's going to make a lot of changes in India. It's a great
Yeah.
initiative. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shivkumar. So we have very little time left. So may I request the audience to pose questions if they have any? Amrita, how are they going to ask questions? Are they going to type it in the chat box, or are you going to enable their mics? How are you going to do it? Amrita, are you there? Amrita, you're muted.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, but if there is any question, people can put it in the chat. Or
So any questions?
I think CEO Nixie Anil Kumar Jain has his hand up.
okay, admin, can you upgrade Anilji quickly? Can we upgrade? Anilji, you can ask your question. Anilji, would you speak now? We can't hear you.
Uh, Very interesting discussion, Rajat, which you carried out as a moderator, and congratulations to all of you. Uh, my only, I want to just giving information. You were discussing with Satish Babu about the internationalized domain name and universal acceptance, and then you gave a example of malaria long back. But here, let me tell you that. There was a study by ICANN in 2017, I hope, and it shows that around $30 billion business is there for all those organizations who are going to adopt universal acceptance. One more information that Government of India has started a multilingual internet group where the task is to suggest to the government about the various initiatives which are required to implement the multilingual internet, because 88% of we Indians do not communicate in English. Uh, the member of this committee of multilingual is Google, Microsoft, Johor, Rediff, all those people, and they are member and they are actively participating because they feel that there is a business case in accepting the universal acceptance. And yesterday I requested Sunil ji, who is on the panel, also to join us so that we have right kind of people who are working to spread this particular message. And I think this is a next round of internet revolution which is going to come in India. And it is expected that next 1 billion broadband users will be those who do not speak English. Just a information, there is no question. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Anilji. That is very relevant information. So that incentive that Satish was talking about, that incentive to invest is already there. And I hope that the large size of the Indian market, as you suggested, 1 billion broadband connections will provide that incentive because of the large market. So, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I have I'm not going to try and summarize it, but I just want to raise 2 points and then conclude, not to raise any points, but sort of discuss 2 points that have already been raised in the discussion.
Rajat, sorry to intervene. There was just one question, if quickly can be taken by V. Sharad. It says, how important is Make in India for the implementation of 4G connectivity? Usually the cheaper fiber being imported from other countries is of inferior quality. Anyone wants to take it quickly?
I think Dr. Shiv Kumar might be the best.
I'm taking. Yeah, I'm. See, 4G is in fact very important and has been a vital in the growth of the broadband in India. Certainly, it need to spread to the certain areas. As having said that, that investors or the operators usually don't go to the too deep into the remote areas because of the viability and different. It can come up, and the government is facilitating through the USO funds and also giving the different incentives to go to the remote area. So it's a very vital and there is a basically that hybrid approach has to be adopted because there are certain areas where even if whether there is a CSR fund or a lot of fund is flowing from the different quarters, then also it's not possible to have the fiber in certain because of the terrain or because of the calamities, different type of natural disasters comes up. So the in that case, the hybrid model, which with the coming of the satellite reforms and the space reform that are coming up and with the different type of technologies coming up. The the satellite constellations are coming up like Leo, and they're having the very little latency and having the reliability and the cost effectiveness. So it's going to be a hybrid model which is going to be adopted now. Thank you.
Thank you. Rajat, over to you. Rajat, we can't hear you if you are speaking. I think there is some issue at Rajat's end. Rajat, can you hear us?
I'll just call him Amrita.
Okay. Admin, can you unmute Ikrier? ICRIER. Admin, can you unmute Ikrier?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, I sort of have logged on from another laptop. I don't know, I don't think you can see me, but well, I can't see myself. Well, thank you. I got accidentally logged off from my laptop. So as I was saying, this has been a wonderful discussion. And I just wanted to make 2 points, pick up on 2 points. One is that as India becomes ready to host the G20, and I think this is the point that Sunil was making, and I promised that I will respond to that. Are we able to pull our weight in institutions, in global institutions? Are we, or simply in economist terms, are we going to be price takers? Or are we going to be taking the standards that are developed and are we going to sort of apply those standards in our domestic sort of ecosystem? Or can we become the producers of standards? Can we become producers of intellectual property? And I think this is a great opportunity for us to become producers of intellectual property and producers of standards. And for that to happen, we have to pull our weight in international institutions like ICANN, in the multi-stakeholder system. And this G20 will become an opportunity to begin. As Satish is saying, we are already beginning to do that. But I think we should not be diffident or defensive about pulling our weight in these organizations, whether it is G20 or whether it is ICANN. I think for too long, we have been sort of, I would say, we have been at the mercy of being dictated by standards or agendas even that were created outside the country and that may not have been necessarily to our sort of benefit. I'm not for a moment being nationalist here. I don't think, we can be patriotic, etc. But I think nationalism often comes in the way. You can't be aggressive. So, but you can be intellectually strong. You can be skillfully strong. You can be, strong by the weight of the things, the arguments, and the standards that we can create intellectually for the rest of the world to then emulate. There is already one that is beginning to happen. So I'm not speaking in the air. There is one that is already beginning to happen. And I think Shiva did begin to talk about that. And that is the interoperable UPI system based on the UIDAI or the Aadhaar. We have that. It is built on that UPI system. And I think that is what the rest of the world is beginning to ask for so that the payments interface becomes interoperable and seamless, and the small and the big can all participate in that system. And that is an example of reverse innovation. I think we should build more on that so that we can begin to leverage our strength, both our intellectual strength and the strength of our domestic market in international fora like the ICANN and the G20. And I'm sure we'll be able to do that. So thank you very much, IIGF, and thank you to the panelists. I think most informative session and intellectually stimulating session, Nirmita, Sunil, Satish, and Shiva, and of course, Mr. Jain for your comment and contribution and your support in organizing this IIGF event and panel. Thank you. Back to you, Amrita.
Thank you so much, everyone, and for this excellent discussion. So we conclude this session, and for the others in the room, the next session is at 1:30. We start with the fireside chat.
Thanks, everyone.